Michael Herklots. You are the co-owner and founder of Ferio Tego. You previously were with Nat Sherman for a long time. So I want to take it back. Go back before you even got into cigars. What led you into that world? What led you into wanting to work in cigars?
My background was music.
Okay.
I was a musician pursuing drumming all through middle school and high school. I went to Berklee College of Music in Boston to pursue music as a career. And while I was in school, enjoyed my first cigar for the first time, and I loved it. And as an artist, you kind of get crazy about things that you find interesting and you want to learn more and more and more. But as a musician, I certainly couldn't afford to learn much more and more and
Right.
more when it comes to premium cigars. So I got a job at a little kiosk in the Prudential Center Mall that sold cigars. And at that time, it was 1999. There was still quite a few opportunities to be able to enjoy cigars um, out in the open, in bars, and in other opportunities. And there were lots of retail stores. So I had a lot of early opportunities to discover cigars, obviously while I was selling them, but also by going to other stores and experiencing them. And I really, really enjoyed it. So I moved to New York in 2002 to pursue a career as a musician, but I got a job at the Davidoff store on Madison Avenue in sales as a sales associate. And I knew the general manager of that store at the time,
Hmm.
and so that made it obviously it was very fortuitous, and I was very fortunate to be able to get that opportunity as a 22-year-old kid who had just moved to the city. So I spent 2002 to 2006 working retail sales at the Davidoff store on Madison Avenue, and then in 2006 Davidoff bought a second store on the other side of town in an area called Columbus Circle. So they moved me there as the general manager in 2006. In 2008, I took back over Madison Avenue as well and ran both Davidoff stores in New York up until 2011 when I left Davidoff to join Nat Sherman, which at the time was kind of a crazy move. But it really we had a very long term vision of how we were going to kind of uh, redevelop and relaunch Nat Sherman in the premium cigar space.
Sure.
And the Sherman family was down. I had a general plan, and then we set off to do it. Which if you look back at it through the lens of 2020, when we ultimately closed, what was the final chapter of Nat Sherman International Cigar Business was a pretty riveting and cool chapter. We did
Yeah.
a lot of cool stuff. We made a lot of exciting products. We built our business beyond what it had ever been for the premium cigar side of the business. But in 2017, Nat Sherman was purchased by Altria. And so we stayed on for, I guess, 2 years or so until Altria decided that premium cigars specifically was not core to their business long term. They gave us an opportunity to try and sell the business, which was awesome. Except then COVID hit, and that made selling a business virtually impossible.
Hmm.
And that forced us to finally stop the process after months of retrying and retrying and retrying, and finally just closing the business. But that led itself to what is now the newest chapter in my story, which is together with the former CFO of Nat Sherman, we purchased the brands and the intellectual property and really everything that belonged to Nat Sherman International, with the exception of the words Nat Sherman. But everything else, all the brands that we had worked to either continue or to develop from scratch, now we own as Ferio Tego. And we're not only continuing the work that we did for the last 10 years or so. But now we're also from scratch building a new brand, new company, new legacy under Ferio Tego.
Was your background as you got into working for Davidoff and then Nat Sherman, was that driven from any education in business, or was that just you had passion for the industry and wanted to get involved in that way. Because I've heard you talk in the past um, really heavily on customer experience, and that, I mean, that's the thing. So like with between Davidoff and Nat Sherman at the Townhouse shop, that
Yeah,
just
I
seems
I
to be the
never had
pinnacle of service
I
and
never had
consistency.
real formal training. Um, I was fortunate enough. I mean, if you go back, my first job when I was in high school, I worked in a pharmacy for a
Okay.
year, and that was customer facing. And then my next job was in a donut shop, and
Hmm.
that was customer facing. And you had to make sure that the coffee was still hot when the customer got it, and you
Yep.
had to make sure that the order was right. So I've always had jobs that were directly related to service and customer experience. And frankly, even as a musician, it is 100% based on your customer experience and consistency and making sure that the show is engaging. And
Absolutely.
the reality is that's what customer service is. That's what retail is. It's a show. And if you don't put on a show that's memorable that somebody wants to see again, it's very difficult to grow a business that way. And so that was just I learned it, I think, through practice and having great mentors and managers and other folks. I also learned it because as a sales associate, you have to survive. So I had to do something on a very personal performance level that made me stand out in a different way than my peers did.
Right.
And so that was really applying everything I knew about music and performing arts and applying it to sales in a way that was uh, a meaningful to the customer and b successful for me and the businesses I worked for.
That's awesome. Yeah, the shops like that stand out, and I think it was Howard Schultz from Starbucks was talking about customer service, and he said what allows shops, restaurants, stores, whatever, any customer experience to stand out from others is the salesperson, business owner, whoever it is, anyone that walks in the door. Your only job is to assume positive intent from any negative vibe you might get from a customer. And
You listen, somebody walks in your door and they are opting in to engage with you,
yeah,
right? I mean, you can do whatever you want to try and advertise or market or promote, whether it's Starbucks or whether it's a concert or whatever it is. You can do everything you can to throw it out there and hope that one of these little pieces of bait ends up hooking a fish and brings it in. But once you bring it in, if you don't over deliver the experience that you have let them believe they are going to experience,
mhm,
you, you don't deserve to have another customer walk in your door because you've just duped that person.
yeah,
That's especially now when there is literally nothing that we can't buy sitting on our toilet.
yeah,
Then if you have a brick and mortar establishment or something physical that somebody has to experience it in person, you must over deliver that experience.
yeah. So with that in mind, how did that affect how you operated at Davidoff and Nat Sherman? Was that something that was just ingrained in you, or was ingrained in the brands, and that they brought you into that?
That's an interesting point. I think when I first started with Davidoff, there was still a lot of focus on Zeno Davidoff, the person,
Sure.
who really was, the in my opinion, the godfather of luxury retail, particularly in the premium cigar space. And so there was always a piece of me. We were never trained to do things the way Zeno did them, but simply by knowing the story and knowing the reverence that Zeno had for the retail experience, um, regardless of price or budget, that
Mhm.
everyone is deserving of that experience. That's just something I really took to heart, and it's something I've carried with me forever. I carried it with me to Nat Sherman. applied it in a more authentic way that makes sense to Nat Sherman. Obviously, Nat Sherman
Sure.
is not the same as Davidoff, but um, there were things that you could extract from that mindset that were very applicable to Nat Sherman. And even now, although we don't have a retail store under Ferio Tego, we're still talking about a consumer good that people opt into purchasing,
Hmm.
that retailers opt into supporting, and we have to over deliver on this experience.
Yeah, it's. I think I've had all of them that have come out. The timeless. I didn't smoke that much timeless before you had it. I had a little bit over the years that I'd find, but the Pan American Pan American is that the line?
Pan Americana, Pan
That's it.
Americana.
I keep going back to that one. It's
It's a very special blend.
yeah, yeah. Um, but we'll get back to Ferio Tego. Nat Sherman. When you were at Nat Sherman, well, let me rephrase that. When you were about to get involved with Nat Sherman, did they have an expectation that you would take that to the next level? Because that's a super old brand. And what was the status of it when you showed up to when you left?
Um, when they hired me because it was it had just turned 80 years old. It
Okay,
was predominantly recognized as a luxury cigarette, despite the fact that it had started as a premium cigar, started as a retail business, then became a premium cigar brand, then became a cigarette in the 1950s. So it enjoyed
sure.
almost 20 years of just being retail and premium cigar. The success of their cigarette business, I think, so extraordinary that to focus on their business. And as a result, the premium cigar side of their business suffered to a degree. And that's something that they were very open with when they started recruiting me and considering me to work for them. Um, Initially, they were just looking for someone to run the store. And I said that was not really something I was interested in. Since I was running two
Mhm.
Davidoff stores at the time,
Right.
it really didn't make a lot of sense in my story to leave two Davidoff stores to run one Nat Sherman store. But as we really started going down the rabbit hole of what could I really bring to the table, it wasn't just about trying to fix a store. It was really about rebuilding a brand and rebuilding perception to that brand. And when you do that successfully and you add relevance not just to the brand but to the products on which the brand lives,
Mhm.
then that retail experience, particularly a flagship retail experience, can then evolve along with it because you're you're changing the brand equity literally every day as more and more people look for a timeless collection or a metropolitan selection. Each time somebody bought in to trying Nat Sherman for the first time, it went from being an old 80-year-old brand to a very
Mhm.
new and relevant 82-year-old brand, an 83-year-old brand. And so we just did that over and over and over again, right to the end.
That store, the Townhouse, does that go back to the beginning of the brand at Nat Sherman, or was that something that you guys acquired as after you
The
came on board?
original, the original store was 1400 Broadway, and it was there from 1930, from its inception until 1976. Then it
Okay.
moved to 55th and 5th, which was a ridiculous idea to put a tobacco shop on Fifth Avenue in Manhattan. I mean, you could buy tobacco literally on every corner in
Right.
1976. So the fact that he put this colossal luxury emporium for tobacco products on Fifth Avenue was completely crazy, but did exactly what I think he intended to do, which was really
Mhm.
elevate Nat Sherman to Fifth Avenue level. So it was there 1976 to 1990. Then it moved to the corner of 42nd and 5th, right across from the New York Public Library from 1990 until 2007. And then it opened up in its last location, which was mid block. But it was never called the Townhouse until I joined.
Okay.
And that was very deliberate. Um, there were lots of people who had heard of Nat Sherman. There were still not a lot of people who had experienced Nat Sherman, particularly in New York. And so I thought by um, lots of lots of big brands have stores,
Hmm.
and you typically refer to them as the store. By using a different term that was more reflective of the actual experience, it evoked um, an understanding of what that experience might be, even without having actually visited. You knew that
Hmm.
by hearing the Nat Sherman Townhouse in New York, you knew that it must be significantly different than any other store you've been in.
Right. And then COVID hit. So you were operating that, you, for lack of better words, closed that down so gracefully and flowed into
Yeah.
what you're doing now. So talk through that
Well,
process.
closing was not plan A, selling was plan A.
Oh, right.
And and so we were very, very far along to successfully sell the business. And and COVID hit literally um the week, well, I shouldn't say hit, it was trickling along,
Yeah.
but we were in a meeting with the buyers at Altria headquarters, ready to go. Just a
Hmm.
little more work to do, but it was a done deal. And we all agreed we'd regroup in 10 days or something. And at the time we were joking about this, like weird flu in Seattle that was kind of
Right.
strange, like everyone's overreacting, uh until like 10 days later there's a freezer truck full of bodies at the bottom of my hill at the hospital, and
Yeah.
we got on a conference call, everyone isolated in our respective places, and the buyers rightfully said, this is not the time for us to buy a premium cigar business. So we went back to the drawing board, and with Brendan, the CFO, we just kept kind of repackaging, reaching out to new suitors, other people that we thought it could be a good fit for.
Hmm.
Um, and we made a lot of progress. But the more progress we made, particularly here in New York, things were not getting back to normal the way they were in other places, and we just weren't reopening. And, again, I can't imagine a buyer in their right mind who would say, "Oh, cool, I'll take on this liability that's completely
Right.
closed right now and hope that it turns around." So ultimately, we knew we had to be done by the end of the year, and so we pushed it into July, and then just finally said, "Okay, we just can't keep going." And so we announced that we didn't successfully sell, that we would have to start dismantling and close, and then we basically reopened the townhouse in order to gracefully liquidate it.
I saw some of the pictures of lines out the door
It was
at the
awesome. I
end.
mean, I have to
Yeah.
tell you, I've said this on other interviews in the past. It was not fun to close the business, but
Hmm.
at a time when everything was just so messed up, um, nobody was in the city, but we would all come together to work every day at a time when people were not able to come together to work except essential workers.
Yeah.
So the fact that we could actually come to work and be together during this period was actually quite cathartic. And then the people who were able to come into the store and experience it one more time and take advantage of our sort of estate sale, for lack of a better word, were all of the essential workers that were working in the city throughout the craziness of the height of COVID.
Yeah.
So cops and firemen and sanitation workers and EMS and doctors and nurses, and it was really like everyone else had kind of split, or they were living back in the suburbs, and they weren't coming into the city. And so while it was unfortunate that a lot of people didn't get to say goodbye, um, so many like really deserving people got to get in line at the store and take
Hmm.
another walk through and scoop up some incredible deals. It was a really nice way to go out.
Right.
And we did
So,
the same on our wholesale business. I mean, we called all our retail stores, particularly brick and mortar stores, and
mhm.
we tried to really focus on single store operators who were either closed or just opening, and say, look, you guys have been stuck. You've been, trying to pull off curbside. You don't have a website. You haven't been able to compete. We're not. going to stay in business. So we're going to give you guys the first right to buy the products that you've always loved. We're going to give you a great price on them, and you can make more money on it and get back on your feet. And hopefully that helps you get through pandemic. And it did for a lot of retailers. It really did.
What were those discussions like when you and your business partner were, I guess before Ferio Tego, were having the idea of, should we buy Nat Sherman? Should we buy these brands and start our own? Because
Yeah,
I'd
it
imagine that
really
was happening
it
before
it
the
wasn't
shutdown.
happening. It wasn't happening in the way you would think, because the brands were never contemplated to be sold on their own.
Hmm.
And to be clear, we don't own Nat Sherman. Nat Sherman is still a cigarette brand owned and sold by Altria. So
Right.
we own the brands of Nat Sherman International. But those brands were never intended to be sold standalone. They were only going to be included in the larger deal. So when we failed at the larger deal, we reported in a release that the brands were not sold, that everything is just closing and being put away.
Yeah.
Um, However, later, after that announcement, I guess in the late summer, there had been so much interest from lots of third parties in the brands that the company was kind of forced in a way to have to consider the offers on the table. Um, and once we got wind of that, that's really where our wheels started to turn. Because if there was any kind of underlying piece that I had with this process, it it was that at least um, number one, there was nothing wrong with the work that we did.
Hmm.
That everything we did was right and it worked, and the business was growing even up until we closed. And that knowing that when we closed, that would be the end of the story. So we would be able to put the period at the last sentence of the last page and close the book.
Right.
And that felt pretty good to me, that nothing was going to happen to this later on. Um, so then once it was clear that maybe they could go on and that we were considering offers for these brands, that really threw me into defense mode. Um, and I called Brendan because we had shared our own kind of ideas at the time, and Ferio Tego was one of my original ideas, just as a small brand. Um, I called Brendan and said, "It looks like they will consider selling the brands. I think we should make a play for it. What do you think? We do Ferio Tego together, and we do it ourselves."
Hmm.
And he was, we didn't have a whole lot of time, um, but we reached out to the folks in charge of the deal, and we said, we'd really like to be considered. And the ramification of that was obviously then we got left out of the process, whereas before we were part of the process. Now we were
Hmm.
left out. But fortunately, maybe 10 days, 2 weeks after we put in the offer, um, they called us and said, everyone agrees you guys are the best um, the best team to continue the work and to continue the legacy. So congratulations, let's go to close. And then we had to form a company,
Hmm.
and then tell our wives, and off we went.
That's awesome. Well,
Yeah.
so the brand Ferio Tego. Let me pull this up. So if people haven't seen this logo, talk through the branding, where it came from, what inspired it.
So Ferio Tego is the motto on the Herklots family coat of arms, which sounds very, I don't know, douchey, the whole coat of arms thing, but we have one. Actually,
If you
anyone,
have a good one, use it.
yeah. And so I've always loved our coat of arms and the
Hmm.
story. I've always loved Ferio Tego and the way it sounds. So I protected it years ago in our class from a trademark perspective, just because I figured, who knows what the future would hold. And but the image specifically is located in the coat of arms. If you zoom into the shield of our coat of arms, and you can see it on the Ferio Tego website, if you zoom into the shield, it's this image of Hercules striking the Hydra.
Right.
Um, and Ferio Tego, in the context of this image, is strike and defend, which I think is kind of interesting
Hmm.
in the context of what we've ultimately done with Ferio Tego, striking at the opportunity to get these brands and being able to defend them and grow them moving forward, is a very interesting parallel to the story that's told in our family coat of arms. So it really resonated with us, and we're excited to use it every day.
So you bought brands from Nat Sherman, Timeless, Metropolitan. Is there any others?
Well, there are some of the sub brands that we also anything that was owned as intellectual property under Nat Sherman International, we purchased. So if you think of, you've got Timeless Prestige, Timeless Supreme, Timeless Sterling, Timeless Pan Americana, Metropolitan Connecticut, Metropolitan Maduro, Metropolitan Host Maduro, Metropolitan Habano. We
Hmm.
also bought the Apoca and Apoca Reserva brands, Ancora, which was our accessories brand,
Hmm.
all of the domains, and all of the trade dress and right to re-commercialize exactly the way we had done it in the first place, just without Nat Sherman International included. So it was a lot of dotting I's and crossing T's to make sure that everyone was clear of what our intention was.
Yeah.
That we were not interested in using Nat Sherman at all. Nat Sherman will forever and only be used from a historical storytelling, not
Yeah.
unlike we're doing right now. But moving forward, these brands will fully live under Ferio Tego moving forward.
Were you a part of the blending process of some of these?
All of them, with the
Okay.
exception of the from a creative standpoint, the Metropolitan Connecticut, the Metropolitan Maduro, and the Metropolitan Host are the three blends that predate my arrival to Nat Sherman. When I joined Nat Sherman, there were two things immediately to do. One was to start creating new blends. So that was ultimately Timeless Prestige, Timeless Supreme. Um, and at the same time, also re-engage the factories making Metropolitan and make sure that those blends were truly what they should be.
Hmm.
So making a blend is not easy, but maintaining a blend year after year is actually much more difficult in order to keep it the same. And so I wanted to make sure that we went back to those blends and took the opportunity to kind of reset them so that they truly tasted the closest to their original experience in the mid 90s. And so we successfully did that. And so since 2011, my work was to create new blends and new experiences, and equally, if not more important, maintain the blends and experiences that were now already established, whether they were Timeless from 2011-12 or Metropolitan from 1994-1995, in the most traditional of premium cigar disciplines.
Hmm.
Maintaining and preserving experience year after year is the core philosophy of the premium cigar industry.
Right.
It's only in the last 10 or 15 years, 20 years maybe, where this idea of what's new is relevant. But at the end of the day, when you're done with what's new, you need core. And that's what
Yeah.
really makes a blend, that is certainly makes a brand. That's what made Nat Sherman so successful. And so Ferio Tego takes a very similar approach. Of course, we like to innovate and create new products, and bring new offerings to market, but we are squarely focused on making sure that our core is core, and
Hmm.
it is as good as the last one and as good as the next one.
Yeah, the consistency and even just the flavor profiles that are found in the core line, and then the new lines that you've created. I'd be comfortable handing any of those to a new cigar smoker. And that's like that's something I want to see with this podcast, with this magazine, is that there's such a diverse group in the cigar industry, firearms, alcohol, from like the super blue collar guys that will smoke a cigar by a campfire, mowing the lawn, whatever it is, to going to high end shops and then buying the $500 Davidoff in its own wood box.
Yeah,
um,
there's something to be said for hobbies like these where if you extract yourself out of brand for a moment and you just
hmm
look at the sort of fundamental thing of what makes this so special, it's kind of split. Number one, in and of itself, it is just such a simple thing. It's just a bunch of leaves rolled together.
yeah.
And all premium cigars, particularly those that are handmade, are exactly the same. So, in a way, it doesn't matter what the brand is because this is so misunderstood by the majority of people that if you are among the very small minority that appreciates such a misunderstood little rolled up tube of leaves,
hmm
you are immediately um, uh, brought together in this level of camaraderie that I think supersedes just about any hobby there is. When you look at the other vices that you mentioned and hobbies that you mentioned, even they are probably more common and more welcomed by more people than premium cigars are.
Yeah.
But when you start drilling into brands, um, there tends to be this once again sort of classification.
Yeah.
So whether it's high end rifles, you can be at crazy five and six figure numbers to purchase a rifle versus your grandfather's
hmm
that he left you. But the love to shoot is the same, right? Then you can
Yep.
just really go down the rabbit hole of connoisseurship and collecting, but the fundamental love and passion for these things is just so simple that it really does um, transcend brand. Where I think Ferio Tego really stands in a place of its own is the ability for this brand to be as wide as it is today and will be. That you can come into Ferio Tego with Metropolitan at $7 a piece. Um, you can also buy the newest offering at 2020 at $21 to $22. And $22 is not an inexpensive cigar. Frankly, $7 is not an inexpensive
Right.
cigar when you're spending if you're enjoying one per day. Um, but where we have really, I think, been inspired by Nat Sherman and now really carved on our own is over delivering on value. And it goes back to how we opened this conversation. If you're going to come and see my show, it is going to be the best show you've ever seen. And you're going to want to come and see it again. And you're going to bring a friend with you. And
hmm
that might be a friend that's never seen the show, or that might be a friend that's seen it before and wants to see it again. And as long as we over deliver every single time, we're in great shape. And Ferio Tego has done that now since October in market. And we will certainly do that for many more years to come.
What do you think sets apart your brand? And not to put down other brands, but I think I don't know what it is. Is it the presentation or is it just the story? Like to me, when I think of your brand, when the Elegancia came out, and showed up at the shop, I was like okay, another Connecticut, another Ferio Tego or Herklots, Connecticut. So I was like, it's gonna be smooth, it's gonna be simple, it's gonna be approachable. But then elegant is like that was the word that I pinpointed. I was like, this is perfect. I sat down, I think I was just working, lit it up, and I was like, holy shit.
Yeah, man. And
There's something
it
different
came
and
in
it's
a
approachable, but it's full
and
bodied.
it came in a, and it came in a perfectly functioning, incredible travel humidor. I mean,
Right.
everything about it over delivers.
Yeah.
That I think that in and of itself, someone said criticizing it as my first release, saying that I had no right to launch the brand at $21, and it was before it had even there was even a picture of it.
Yeah.
Uh, and how could you possibly know that until it's
Well,
out?
Well,
If
it's
you buy it
also
and
you
you taste
launching
it,
a brand after having launched several.
sure. But
You've
I
been in
mean,
the industry.
it's you are you are prejudging an experience.
Yeah.
And I think if we've learned anything in the last 10 years, it's allow things to fall out and then you can judge.
Mhm.
Um, but I think what has been proven true now since October is uh, there was a pretty strong fan base that loves Elegancia and loves Generoso and
Mhm.
recognizes just how much value and experience those two blends offer. Um, so, what makes them stand out? I think number one, over delivering on value. Um, and then you obviously the merit and quality of the product and experience itself, the flavor, the combustion,
Mhm.
the complexity, right? Regardless of price, is it doing the fundamental things that it's supposed to do? Can you draw on it? Does it burn evenly? All of those things, whether it's $2 or $200, if it doesn't do that, it's not doing what it's supposed to be doing. It's garbage. So we've been able to achieve that. And then, then it comes down to what is the point of differentiation that makes the brand resonate with you as a consumer. I mean, I'll tell you what makes it resonate with me. I own it, and
Yeah.
I feel it, and I live it. But what makes you want to take a picture of it and post it? We all
Yeah.
know that there are we consume lots of things every single day. We eat lots of different things. We drink lots of different things. We smoke lots of different things. We wear lots of different things, but we don't post every one of those things. We are conditioned to be very deliberate about what we brag about. And we
Mhm.
generally brag about things that A, we think we have permission to brag about, and B, that will be shared um, from an opinion standpoint, and others will jump in and pat us on the back and say, oh man, that's great. That is what we do as consumers now every day. There's lots of stuff that we consume that we don't brag about.
Mhm.
And what we are working really hard on is making everybody love this brand and love the story and love the people, love our process, and feel empowered to brag about it and feel
Yeah.
like it's as much their brand as it is our brand. And hopefully they do.
What's your blending process? Has that changed since you started Ferio Tego?
No, um,
Talk through that. That's
it,
been fascinating to me how different people approach that.
there's a few different. One is if you are specifically trying to develop something now and you have an idea of what you want it to be, there's one approach to that. The other approach is if you're just blending for inventory, blending to have a book of recipes that you might use one day in the future.
Mhm.
That's different. Um, when we were creating Elegancia and Generoso, it was at a time when we had already had established brands and blends in market, and we're really just in a period of exploration with lots of blends and versions of blends and tweaks of blends for someday in the future. And that was work I had done probably 2017, 2018 with Plasencia in Nicaragua and Quesada in Dominican Republic. So when we were able to do Ferio, and actually I started to work on Elegancia and Generoso before we purchased the brands because I
Mhm.
knew Ferio was going to be something I was going to do. So in that case, we just picked up where we left off, went back to blend ideas and said, okay, let's remake this, remake this. I have an idea, two blends, 6x50, humidors of 10, one creamy and buttery, one full and rich. Let's go. And
Yep.
so that was taking sort of picking up where we left off in the blending process. Um, but in other blends, like uh, for the TAA 2020, that was a specific project that I wanted a specific outcome. And so we were blending towards that goal and then tweaking those to ultimately get 2020 for 2022, which we've just released. That was taking pre-existing, which was the 2020, and then tweaking it to achieve 2022.
When when you're when you have an idea of creating a new line, or take Elegancia or the Generoso, um, do you go into those saying like, I want this specific outcome, I want this flavor profile, I want it to be different than what I had previously, or do you want it to just be a new expression of a profile you've already created? Because I think like I smoke a lot of cigars, I'm able to try a lot. You have take Connecticut's. Um, some of them really stick out, but a lot of them are just sort of simple, smooth. Not too much going on outside of just kind of creamy and light. Um, so when you approach blending Elegancia, did you have a specific profile in mind or a specific outcome, or did you want the experience to come first
Yeah.
and the cigar to back it up?
No, I was going to have two styles.
Mm-hmm.
I knew I was going to have the equivalent of Chardonnay and Cabernet in my mind
Okay.
from a single house. So I wanted to have big bodied, creamy, buttery, toasty, and smooth.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to have rich, full, earthy, savory. And I also knew that both of those had to be full and creamy in mouthfeel. That was the plan.
Mm-hmm.
So playing with blends like Elegancia, for example, was inspired starting with Sterling and figuring out how to really create more bottom and darker notes, but added to what is already the mouthfeel that I wanted to achieve initially with Elegancia.
Okay.
But obviously, once you start tweaking it, like we added Nicaragua, it completely threw off the blend. And so, then you start um, solving for this new problem. It's kind of like a Rubik's cube. Like you take it when it's finished,
Mm-hmm.
and then you mess something up, and now you have to solve for it again.
Right.
And you're probably not going to solve it exactly the same way as you solved it the first time. And you know that you're going to get back to this perfect balance, but the process is going to be different. So if the finished cube is just this idea of perfect balance, not specific flavor, then you do something to disrupt it. Like one of the easiest things to do is take a blend that you love and change the wrapper. And you put a new wrapper on it, and it's a completely different cigar
Mm-hmm.
that's totally out of balance. And you can ask yourself, is there something, is the change, even though it's out of balance, is whatever new worth keeping? And if it is, then you solve for new balance by then tweaking the blend to take it in this new direction. But if it's completely unredeemable,
Mm-hmm.
then you put the old wrapper back on and then change something else, change a filler, swap out a leaf for a different leaf and see what happens. Is it redeemable? If it's redeemable and interesting, then you start solving for the new filler. That's some of the like exploration blending that I think is really a luxury when you don't have something to make and launch right away, and you can just build up a library of options. And so I had a lot of options that I had built up, maybe that I hadn't finished,
Mm-hmm.
but that were certainly complete enough where we could pick up and really do some good work quickly and get some new offerings in market.
You're really close to the Quesada family, and that's been developed over the years. How did they walk you through that process and train you on the blending side of things, or would you more or less go to them with an idea and be like, "Here's kind of what we want to see.
I've been
How
friends with
do we
them
get there?"
since 2003. I met them
Okay.
in 03. And the first time I went to Dominican, I believe, was late 03 or 04. And then I would go down about once a year just to spend time with them and hang out and spend time in the factory. At the time, I spent a lot more time with uh, Manolo because the kids were my age and they were in school and working and doing other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But then as they got more involved in the business, I became a lot closer with the younger generation. Not that I became less close with Manolo, I became even closer. But became closer with the generation that I was obviously much more closely affiliated with.
Right.
Um, and I wouldn't say at any point that there was a deliberate attempt to teach. There was always a willingness to share. And I got to spend an extraordinary amount of time just with them and around them while they were doing what they did. And they were
Hmm.
just kind enough to let me participate. And so it wasn't so much if this happens, do this. If you experience X, do Y. It was much more of just being able to follow along and experience it in real time and then be able to ask thoughtful questions and be given either a deliberate answer or and I have no idea, let's go find out answer. And
Right.
no different than in retail. um I feel really fortunate that I was able to start when I was really young and I was able to be around incredibly, not just incredibly talented people, but incredibly generous people who are willing to share it. I mean,
Hmm.
I feel like today there tends to be less willingness to encourage other people to achieve your level of success. Like there tends to be now this I want to keep my lead position and so you stay down here and I'll teach you a little, but I'll never teach you as much as I know because then you
Hmm.
might jump ahead of me and that's crazy. I mean,
Yeah, that's too
uh
common.
thank God I didn't have that in the leaders I was around and the managers I was around and the just smart people and uh older experts generations ahead of me, like the Manolos and the Benjamin Mendezes and all those folks. Um, it was just I was always surrounded around people who believed in the more you know, the better you can be, and the better you can be, the better it is for everybody. And I can
Hmm.
learn from you as much as you can learn from me. That was just my whole upbringing in this business. And so especially when I look at the Casadas and the Placencias, although that was a later relationship towards the I guess mid to early 2000s, the first decade of the thousands that really developed once I joined Nat Sherman in 2011. Um, the same thing. Like Nestor and I are basically the same age,
Hmm.
but this guy is just a wealth of knowledge in areas that I could never possibly understand, and nor would I even pretend that I will ever know what he knows.
Right.
And that's perfectly fine. And he would never pretend that he knows what I know about retail because I did that for 20 years and he's done his thing for 20 years. And so that's what's great about trusting people and surrounding yourself with good partners is the willingness to share and learn and listen and know that you'll never know as much as they do, so you can always ask them again.
Yeah.
That's what makes these relationships so valuable.
I always thought it was cool to see in past jobs and just growing up, whether it was teachers or managers or whatever, is when you would find a point that neither of you have the answer. And then it's like, okay, that I think that's where you see leadership kind of take the split of is the leader going to kind of take you on that adventure of like, let's figure this out together, or is it you wait here, I'm just gonna go figure it out and then I'll let you know when we figure it out. And
Or
that's
even
such a
worse,
divide.
they let you go do it, and if you did it wrong, they hang you out to dry when they didn't have a better answer in the first place.
Right. So when you have the expert on something and then someone learning saying like, let's go figure this out together.
Yeah,
It
it's
puts
like
you
jumping out of a plane in tandem, right? There's
yeah,
there's there's something about we are in this together. You have to do your part and not freak out. I'm going to do my part and rip this cord when I'm supposed to.
yep.
And if we do what we're supposed to do, we're going to be on the ground together.
I hope not all business experiences are like jumping out of an airplane though.
No, no, fair enough.
I
But let me
really
tell you, last couple of years, they sure have felt like it for me.
that's true. I mean, you came out on the other side well. So
So I think I haven't landed yet. We're still but at least the shoot has deployed.
I mean, at least it worked.
Yeah.
You haven't had to pull the emergency chute yet. So with your Ferio Tego lines, the two new ones, I've heard you talk about this, and I find this interesting. Your comparison you've given is you blend them like wine, where opposed to um, most cigar brands, a cigar is created, and then the expectation is that blend continues, or at least the flavor profile of that blend continues. So then you have to source potentially other tobaccos, other blends, tweak the blend as you go to keep it as close as you can to that original
Yep.
creation. If I'm understanding this right, Elegancia and Generoso are not that. You're allowing those to change over time?
We are allowing them to have a greater individuality by year. So, for example, if we're making Sterling,
Mhm.
every production we're making Sterling, we are retasting it to make sure that even if we have the exact same tobaccos that we had in the last production, that they have not changed over time and
Sure.
evolved over time through aging. So there's a constant reevaluation to make sure that the flavor and experience is exactly the same as it was before. Um, with Elegancia and Generoso, we are making from scratch every production, which is done in limited annual releases. Um, and we are tasting to make sure that it is within the appropriate style,
Mhm.
but not exact. And so, with wine, it's slightly different because not only are you allowing the change, but that's also a direct result of the fact that everything in the bottle is the expression of that particular vintage from the vineyard.
Mhm.
And but the will not winemaker does not follow cookie cutter instructions when they're making the wine every year. So even though it may be grown in the same vineyard, based on the weather, they might harvest earlier. They might let the fruit go longer. They might remove some fruit in order to have the remaining fruit get bigger. So there's lots of things, individual judgment calls every year that a winemaker will make all the way and up to the time that it is bottled in order to try and make the best Chardonnay they can make or the best Cabernet
Mhm.
they can make, given what God gave them that year. We are taking a similar approach in that we are taking the tobaccos that are available across any number of years, putting them together in a like way to the previous year, and then making the best we can that year. So hopefully every year it is our best work. Every year it tastes very familiar, but without tasting like a replication
Mhm.
of the one you had the year before. And that's purely just to allow for some fun, for some engagement, for some evolution.
Yeah.
Um, you know, there is something that can feel somewhat paralyzing when you take the job so seriously, like we do, of keeping Sterling Sterling, of keeping Panamericana Panamericana. I mean, there are lots of companies that may not take it as seriously as we do, and that allow for way more ebbs and flows over time.
Mhm.
But but I don't believe in that. I believe in we've created an experience that you have bought into, and so now it's our job to maintain that experience in perpetuity, unless we tell you otherwise. In this case, we're allowing ourselves the ability to allow it to evolve and change.
What's coming next? Do you have a do you
So
I
we
guess do
just
you have any PCA releases that you can talk about or anything coming out this year or
we just launched the TAA.
okay.
So a 2022 limited edition for Tobacconists Association of America that just started shipping last week. And we are soon to release the 2022 um, Elegancia and Generoso Ferio Tego flagships. So those are coming soon. It's not specifically a show release, but obviously, while we are at the show, it will be a very current release
Right.
that will hopefully still be available. There's a couple other things that are really in the works, but just based on the supply chain and constant delays, I really hate um, I hate what we have become, which is just this constant culture of tease
Hmm.
and no action. Like I've read more press releases and announcements of things that haven't happened over the last 2.5 to 3 years. And it's almost like nobody cares whether it happens or not. People are just so excited about the news, and then they talk about it, and then they have opinions, and then they scream at each other about opinions, and then they're on to another press release, but no one ever holds to account what was actually in the first announcement.
Right.
So I no longer make announcements until I have dates. And that usually means I have finished goods in hand, and we can now tell you this is going to happen in 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks. But there are really cool things in the hopper.
I'm excited to see what's coming out. I gotta get a hold of the TAA. There's a shop in Madison. I'm in Wisconsin, and I'm right between Madison and Milwaukee. There's Lake Country Cigars, which is where I'm at too often, and then there's Tasting Room, which was an awesome shop in Madison.
So
But they're a TAA.
I'm gonna be in tasting room
Okay.
in 2 weeks.
Really?
Yeah,
What?
we're gonna do an event. I gotta find the date. I don't have it right here. But I'll be there. I'm in California this week, home the next 2 weeks, and then the week after that, 28th
Okay.
maybe, something like that.
Okay. Is that a do you know if that's a weekend thing you're doing
I think it's a
during the
Thursday,
week?
Wednesday. Yeah, during the week.
I will try to be at that.
Tasting room of Monona. We'll be there.
Yeah, that's a great shop. Have you been there?
Great shop. Yeah. In
Yep.
fact, one of my last events for Nat Sherman International on the road was in their store.
Yeah, and I don't know
So I'm
if you'd
excited to
been
get
in the
back.
old store, but
I,
the
I
new
remember
build
the
was
old store, but I've been in the new store.
such a good move. And then I believe they
Yeah.
have plans to make a monster store on the other side of the city. So that'll be cool to see.
No, they're
Um,
a great partner, very supportive of Ferio Tego, and I know they
mhm,
got their TAA limiteds in. So make sure you support them.
I'll do that. Something we like to focus on in the magazine is a part of the stories are well, all the stories we tell and the people we involve ourselves with are people that we see pursuing the American dream and pursuing success. Um, and like you gave a good example of like you're jumping out of the airplane together with your business partner or your customers, like whatever that is, you're going on this adventure together, trying to deliver. Um, that being said, with your story and with your goals, how would you define success or failure? What when you're working on a project, where's that line of like this worked, this was success for my career, for the business, or for this product, or we need to go back to the drawing board and
I think I don't think it's always been the case, but it feels more the case now that success and failure have somehow adopted finality to them.
hmm
And I really don't think that's true. Like,
yeah,
if you've achieved something that you believe is successful, your work is done. And if you've experienced something that would be considered failure, you're toast and it's over and you can't recover from that. I mean, if that were the case, the United States of America wouldn't even be a country.
right,
I mean, the ebbs and flows of successes and failures are what make long-term achievement and progress possible. Uh, so to me, what success and failure have in common is um, is the idea of chance and risk and motivation. And if you assess the risk and you're motivated to try anyway and do your absolute best, then for sure there will either be a successful outcome or a less successful outcome that could be considered a failure. But both of those things should result in subsequent motivation,
Mm-hmm.
subsequent risk assessment, and continued movement forward. And even failures, to me, that's not a step backward. A failure is a move forward, because in both of those cases, you've learned something that you didn't know before. And so you're still closer to an answer. You're still closer
Definitely.
to evolution.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that, that is certainly something that we hold very strong within our philosophy at Ferio Tego. I think personally, and for our company, that even look, think the formation of Ferio Tego is the result of presumed failure to sell, um, and then we instead successfully acquired, and now we're moving forward in a different direction. That was not plan A, but it was only because of a theoretical failure
Mm-hmm.
that we've been able to succeed.
Yeah, I mean, failure is often like that can be reframed as opening up a new opportunity, or just, I mean, the classic Edison
Y
analogy
Yeah,
or the
same
story of
with
him.
defeat. I mean, there are lots of examples where a team is defeated only to go on to win a championship.
Mm-hmm.
It's things are not things are only over when you decide that you are done.
Right.
And I think that is the American dream, is if you aren't done, then you can keep going, and you can keep developing, and you can find new ways of doing things differently to compete and create success for you, for your family, for your customers, for your business partners. I mean, that is the bedrock of what the American dream is.
Yeah, that's, I mean, that's something that I think is uniquely. Would you say it's uniquely American? And it's like, especially, you see, I saw it. Like, I've never been to New York City. It's a place I need to get to. But footage of what New York was doing at the height of COVID,
Bro,
people looked at that as, I mean, it's a tragedy, but people are looking at it like, okay, New York's failing. It's shutting down in every way. But watching people just continue to work and continue to drive and continue to move forward is super cool.
and
Especially
also
in a city
not the
like
first
that.
time, not the first time New York has done it.
No, no, I mean, they're getting too much practice.
Well, but again, if you look at some of the most horrific experiences of our generation, we can now say that we experienced two, to go from
Mhm.
9/11 and 20 years later to COVID. Um, those are two absolutely devastating, city disrupting, uh, uh, rebuilding of the entire metropolis.
Right.
And we did it in 2001, excuse me, with 9/11, which was obviously a horrible experience. And here we are in 2022, differently, doing the same thing. And
Yeah.
it takes thinking different. And how do you get out of it and look at what problems you need to solve for, prioritize, and get out of it? It's but that too is American.
Yeah.
It's no different than you look at a farmer in the Midwest who had a bad crop and lost all of the apples on his orchard.
Mhm.
What do you do? Do you just quit and apply for jobs? You can't. You figure out what to do with what you got, and then you figure out how to make your orchard better so it doesn't happen again. That's that is it. I think it is as uniquely American as anything that is uniquely American can be.
Right. I We were at a winery. My wife went out in Colorado, and from my understanding, it was a apple orchard beforehand. And we were talking to the guy that was giving us the tour, and I was like, "How'd you get into wine?" And he's like, "Growing apples." And we're like, "What does that mean?" He's like, "Realized it sucked at growing apples. Figured out how not to do it, Their plants got diseased, everything died, and he's like, "We can't do that. You can throw in the towel and be like, okay, I failed at this orchard, or just start a new one. Find a new way to do it. Figure out what are the strengths that you have in front of you. What are the strengths that his land had, that his crops have. Figure out what you can grow, and then just run after that."
You
And
bet.
so now, and it, super cool what they're doing, and that's the continual story in these industries that I'm seeing is run into a wall. It's okay, reassess, move forward, might be in a completely new direction, but that doesn't mean it's a failure. It just means you're realigning values
And that doesn't
and
have to
pressing
be
forward,
with
which is
owners.
super cool to
I mean,
watch.
that, yeah, that's the same with if you had a job pre-COVID and lost your job and now it's
Yep.
post-COVID and you're looking for new work. The majority of people I know are not going back looking for the exact same job they had before. They're taking every transferable skill that they learned in job A and are now applying it to discipline B that they
Hmm.
happen to like better and realize that they are equally qualified to be able to do it based on what they learned in their previous roles and experiences. And that too, that's not defeat. That's moving forward. That's evolution. That's trying something new and doing it and applying it. And if it doesn't work, who cares? Then you
Yeah.
try something else.
Yep. That's the core of the American dream. That's the core of hard work. Um, and I know we call it the American dream, but I don't think that's necessarily a innately American thing to have that drive. Because you see
I
that
hope it's a
everywhere.
I
But
hope it's a
it's
human thing.
right. But it's something that maybe we give ourselves as a community pressure and accountability to get off your ass and keep moving. And tragedy hits, failure,
Well, the
whatever.
other thing is what's available. So if
Yeah.
if we look at what we can do versus what they can do in Cuba,
Hmm.
you could be just as driven in Cuba, but in Cuba, you can't open your own business. You
Right.
can't go buy XYZ and try it. There are just things you literally and legally, if you can call it legal, can't do.
Yeah.
Um, so there are certainly things that are awfully special about America. I mean,
Hmm.
a radically imperfect country, but you take it all and add it together, it is pretty uniquely American.
Yeah. Yeah. It's exciting. It's encouraging. So what's next for you, or what do you have any big goals that you're reaching for outside of just the next blend you're working on? And
You
you
know,
talked
my
about not having a retail shop yet. Is that something you're hoping to do, or what's on your horizon?
I've I've spent my whole life dreaming about a million different things. Um, so I've never ruled anything out, which is how I ended up in the cigar business pursuing music. I'm a big believer in not ruling things out.
Right.
I'm also a big believer in you try and set your goals, though specifically you set them equally thematically. And so there are specific goals that I see that would equal success for me. But frankly, the thematic goals for me are really the ones that I'm focused most on, which is how do we continue to drive awareness of our brand and awareness of our story? How do we continue to over deliver on experience, to grow our distribution, and frankly to continue to earn and preserve the trust of consumers and retailers to stick with us and to brag about us.
That's a good goal.
Yeah, a little wide, but
I don't think so. I don't think in your industry. I mean,
that's the goal.
very cool. So you'll be at PCA. We'll be there. We'll be camping out at Room 101's booth, which I think is actually right next to yours.
Yeah, it's super close to mine.
Um, I'm excited. I haven't been to a trade show yet.
Oh, it's a game changer.
It'll be a busy weekend though.
Yep,
Um,
absolutely. If you leave feeling rested, you didn't do it right. I always say
but
that the last day of the trade show, looks like the opening scene of Thriller, of just skeletons walking around,
Yeah.
shadows of their former selves when they got there 4 days ago. But it's a tremendous experience. You get to meet everybody.
Hmm.
And especially now, what you're talking about is a room filled with people who want to be there, who have
Right.
prioritized this show as something that's important to them and important to their business, and they're not going to miss it. And those are people I want to be surrounded by.
Right. That's awesome. I'm excited to see you there. I'm excited to go to that, and then hopefully in a couple weeks I'll see you in Madison.
It's going to be great. I'll see you there before Vegas.
But very cool. All right. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to do this.
Yeah, thanks for having
Where
me.
can people find you?
Personally, everything at Michael Herklots, and for the company, everything at Ferio Tego, except for Twitter, which is Ferio Tego Cigars.
Very cool. Well, we will do what we can to spread the word about your brand and what you're doing, and I'm
Awesome.
excited to see where it goes.
I'm grateful.
Very cool. Well, thank you.